Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So, since Gurudev started by talking about Sangha and how good it is to be together, it made me recall an African proverb I once heard that says, if you want to go faster, go alone. But if you want to go further, go together. So, let's begin. In the past few weeks, we've explored the first 3 precepts of Yama, which is part of the ethical foundation of Raja Yoga. We spoke about ahimsa, satya, and asteya, nonviolence, truthfulness, and non-stealing. And tonight, we'll be speaking about Brahmacharya, which is not always the favorite precept of students because it can be translated as celibacy, continence, moderation, or self-restraint. So, I sort of comforted myself before coming here by remembering that when Gurudev first spoke about this, and I was in the audience, we were just coming out of the hippie revolution. So that was the audience to which he presented this concept. And I'll tell you more about that later. But it's very interesting, very much, I think, synchronous in a way that we're speaking about this tonight. Because if any of you follow the news, does anyone here follow the news? Unfortunately, I do. This is what's in the headlines now. Every single day, the problems that come when people, for whatever reason, cannot exercise the necessary self-restraint at the proper times, and the tremendous suffering that occurs and doesn't go away. It leaves a wound that can last decades and decades. And that made me reflect a little bit about all the precepts of Yama and Niyama. And if the people of the world, if the nations of the world just all agreed to embrace one of the precepts, you can pick any one. But if everyone said, okay, we're on board, we're going to be nonviolent, or we're going to be truthful, or no one's going to be greedy, the entire planet would be transformed. Imagine a world without greed. One precept. Everyone would go to bed well fed. Everyone who had an illness for which we had a cure would be receiving that medicine. Everyone would have proper shelter. One precept that we all signed up for would literally make this world a heaven on earth. That's the power of these precepts if we embrace them. So, Brahmacharya is about energy. Everything in life depends on energy. Anything we want to acquire, accomplish, attain, we need energy. We need energy to amass possessions, to attain positions, to establish relationships. We need energy to get an education. to have a career, and we need energy to pursue spiritual goals. Brahmacharya is about optimizing, maximizing the energy in our system. It's about prioritizing how we will use it, and it's about converting energy into a spiritual force within us. It's powerful stuff. So, how to understand it? The word brahmacharya consists of two words, Brahman and acharya. Brahman refers to the absolute consciousness, the highest reality. You can call it the Godhead. Charya refers to flowing toward or moving with. So brahmacharya refers to conducting your life in such a way that you flow toward realization of that ultimate absolute reality, which is none other than your own higher self. This entails purity in thought, word, and deed. Self-realization, or God realization, is the highest goal one can attain. So there's a little bit of a rule in life. The higher the goal, the more energy is needed to attain it. Correct? So just compare a Sunday jogger to an Olympic marathon champion. Okay, how much energy does that Olympic champion have to put into attaining his goal? Has to totally discipline his life, his diet, his activities, his exercise. Everything has to be aimed toward that goal, 24/7, if he's going to become the champion of the world. A Sunday jogger, what does he have to do? Maybe get a good pair of running shoes, a water bottle, learn a few stretches, and maybe plot an itinerary. That's it. Both good things to do, but the higher the goal, the more effort is required. So, if we wish to attain the highest, we need to make clear choices. We need to set priorities in our life, and we have to direct our energy toward that end. So, one of the definitions of brahmacharya is moderation. One approach to brahmacharya is absolute moderation in everything we do, because anything in excess drains energy. And in a way, it's easier to go to extremes than it is to be moderate always. Would you agree with that? So, the Bhagavad Gita says, it is impossible to practice yoga effectively if you eat or sleep too much or too little. But if you are moderate in your eating, in your playing, in your sleeping, in your staying awake, and if you avoid extremes in everything you do, you will see that the yoga practices will eliminate all pain and suffering. Just through moderation. It requires tremendous discipline. If you know anything about the life of the Buddha, he was born as a prince in a royal palace. At the time of his birth, there was a prophecy that he would either grow up to be an enlightened being or a powerful king. Now, his father was a king, Which option do you think his father favored? He wanted his son to be a king, his successor. So he shielded the Buddha from any sight of suffering or discomfort. The walls around the palace surrounded him at all times, and he lived in a somewhat artificial environment, because the king didn't want his mind to turn to otherworldly things. But as the Buddha grew up, as all teenagers are wont to do, he got curious and a little rebellious. So he plotted an outing outside the palace gates. He had a companion, and they escaped one night. And on their journey, the Buddha met 4 people: a sick man, an old man, a dead man, and an enlightened sadhu, spiritual seeker. So as he met all these people, he asked his companion, "What is this thing? This man looks like he's in terrible shape." And the companion said, "Well, he's sick, sir." And the Buddha said, "Does that happen to everyone?" And the companion said, "Well, usually people get sick at one time or another." And the Buddha said, "Even me? Is it possible I'll get sick?" And the companion said, "Well, sire, it's possible." He asked the same about the old man, and the companion said, "Yes, sir, you will age one day as well." The dead man, that's the fate we're all moving toward. And then he looked at this enlightened young sadhu, and the Buddha said, "What about him? What's going on with him?" And the companion said, "He is glowing with the light of supreme realization." And the Buddha said, "That's what I want." He saw door number 1, 2, 3, 4, and he decided to walk through door number 4. He quickly left the castle, went off into the woods. He had lived at one extreme, and is often the case with pendulums, he swung to the other and became this extreme ascetic. Some stories say at that time he subsisted on rainwater and 1 grain of rice per day. Not a very hearty diet. So in this condition, he was meditating one day on the bank of a river, and a boat happened to go by. And in the boat was a music teacher instructing a student. And he told the student, "If you tighten the strings too much, they will snap. If you leave them too loose, you won't be able to get any music. You need to find the balance." Aha! The Buddha realized a middle path was needed. Moderation. He changed his way. He had a good meal. There's a story about that first meal. He sat under the Bodhi tree and attained the highest enlightenment. So, a moderate path will lead to enlightenment. So it's curious then why Brahmacharya is also associated with celibacy. One might say, that sounds a little extreme. Well, there's actually a subtle scientific explanation. What the ancient yogis noted was that in the sexual act, the most refined, subtle, powerful energy was expended. And it makes good sense if you reflect a little, because the potential outcome of that act is the creation of new life. So the yogi said, if you wish to be single and make your priority realization of that highest consciousness, celibacy will be a powerful aid. You'll conserve that very subtle, refined energy. And if you wish to have a partner, find someone who will support you on your path, someone you can mutually support as you move forward together in a committed relationship, and be moderate in your relations. So, getting back to the early days when Gurudev spoke about that, he made that explanation, and I'm going to tell you it exactly as it unfolded, okay? So, I'm the messenger here. So, we're sitting in the room. He, not long before, had come from this very traditional, refined, cultured society, this village society in India. He was a greatly esteemed guru in a culture that respected spiritual masters. And here he found himself amongst us. So, after pronouncing this teaching, explaining it very nicely, someone from the back didn't raise his hand, but called out, "Hey, Swami, so how often can we do it?" And beginner that I was mortified at that moment, just so embarrassed for him, but he can hold his own in any situation. So this is what he said. First he said, well, back in the ancient times, people would only come together if they wished to have a child. And he paused. And everyone was looking at him with their mouths hanging open. Is this what you're going to tell us? So he continued. And then he said, well, once a year probably wouldn't be too much. Now everyone in the room began to think he may be serious. So the energy began to sort of get a little turbulent. And I think he read the crowd, and he realized that the first duty of a teacher is to keep the students in the room. Otherwise, nothing can happen. So he continued. And then he said, well, probably once a month would be okay. People were a little glassy-eyed. And I will tell you, as the years unfolded, he only increased it one more time. And he pointed to Saint Ramalingam, who's the first photo depicted there. And he said, okay, twice a month should be okay, because that's what he says. I'm just the messenger. But in the light of Brahmacharya in our culture, I think one thing we could all see the wisdom of is to, if we really care about our own well-being, and we really care about our partner's well-being, to really consider, both of you, your constitution, your health, your needs, your circumstances, and make a joint decision. See what will support and deepen the relationship, and see what might be draining either partner, and support one another, as well as find other ways. There are so many ways to give and receive love. And Gurudev said, too much of a good thing is not always a good thing. And when it comes to this activity, too much, because so much of the subtle energy is expended both in men and women, the system can get weakened and the nerves depleted. In any case, Brahmacharya, however you interpret it, celibacy, partial abstinence, moderation, self-restraint, should never be about denial. Anyone who approaches spiritual life by having a list of things that they shouldn't do, you're not going to last long, because it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And it's like no one likes to be told all the time, no, no, no. Your own mind doesn't like to be told, no, 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 you shouldn't, you shouldn't. So you need to reframe it. It's not about denial. Discipline is not about denial. It's about setting priorities. It's about making informed choices. And it's about ultimately attaining the highest realization. And you can't force your mind, but you can educate your mind. You want your mind to be your ally, not your foe. Because if your mind becomes your foe, it will be ingenious at sabotaging and undermining your efforts. So take the time to convince your mind, because it's a very subtle process. I'm going to read you a poem by Kabir, a great mystic poet, that sort of gives you a hint of the subtlety of the unfolding. Friend, please tell me what I can do about this world that I hold on to and keep spinning out. I gave up sewn clothes and wore a robe. But I noticed one day that the cloth was well woven. So I bought some burlap. But I still threw it elegantly over my left shoulder. Then I pulled back my sexual longings, and now I discover that I am angry a lot. I gave up rage, and now I notice that I am greedy all day. I worked hard at dissolving the greed, and now I'm very proud of myself. When the mind wants to break its link with the world, it still holds on to something. Kabir says, listen, my friend, there are very few that find the path. The Hindu scriptures compare the spiritual path to a bridge made of a single hair that's stretched over a river of fire. So you have to walk carefully, skillfully, lightly. And to move along while we still have the strength, the clarity, the opportunity, and the guidance to do so. So Brahmacharya involves a subtle process of sublimation in which material energy is converted into spiritual energy. And it's not that we have to do something special to make that happen. Through our practices, it automatically happens. Through meditation, prayer, service, study, you redirect the mind to flow into and to create spiritual grooves. Literally, physical grooves are made in the brain. Where the thought goes, the energy will follow into that spiritual groove. At the same time, through asana and pranayama, the energy in the body that normally flows downward is reversed and flows upward, awakening the energy within you. Master Shivananda points out that headstand, shoulder stand, fish, Nauli Kriya, Bastrika, Sukapurvaka, and the 3 bandhas or locks, for those who know about all this, Jalandhara Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, and Mula Bandha, all help to redirect the energy upward. So, through your practice, the energy is sublimated. Its course is changed, and it's made to go into these subtle new pathways. That's the process, which is very different than trying to suppress the energy if the natural desire comes up. Suppression is never a good option. Suppression is like pressing down on a spring. What happens is, when you relax your attention for a moment, the spring recoils, and it can undermine what you're trying to do. So, when you have this conserved energy in the system, what happens is it gets converted into pure prana. And this prana is called ojas. It's related to a magnetic field around a person. It helps to increase brain power. It builds the nerves. Those who have problems with memory, it builds the memory. It builds the will force, and it bestows good health, inner strength, vigor, and longevity. In the Yoga Sutras it says, through the practice of Brahmacharya, vigor is attained. Vigor refers to health and mental and physical strength. Then the ojas, when it gets very big and stored in the system, it transmutes to a more subtle form called tejas. Tejas refers to the aura or glow that we see around some people. Have you ever met someone, saintly people, dynamic people? They seem to have a glow. And that's the spiritual energy within them that can heal, uplift, and transform just by their presence. They don't even have to teach. Their being emanates that energy, and we're transformed. Years ago, I was in San Francisco, and I had an opportunity to be with Mother Teresa a number of times. And on one occasion, her nuns were taking their final vows. And this was in a large cathedral in San Francisco that was totally packed. So I was there early in the front, and as we were about to begin, all the high clergy of the city processed in a very grand way. And they had on golden embroidered capes and crowns, and they carried staffs, and there was a certain elegance and grandness as they came in. And they sat up in front in the sacred part of the cathedral. And shortly thereafter, Mother Teresa came in with her nuns, about a dozen nuns following, in their little white, blue trim saris. She was about this big, and hunched over like that. I look like a giant compared to her, this little woman, and she walks in with all the little nuns behind her, and they sat down in the front pews. And I looked at her, and literally it was palpable. You could feel that dynamic spiritual force pulsating within her, emanating around her. And I kept looking from her and the sisters in the pews to the grand display right by the altar of all these great, souls. But there was no comparison. There was no comparison. And I spent the next couple of hours with my eyes just fixed on her. And I felt I learned more about spiritual life just sitting there watching her pretty much do nothing for 2 hours than I could have figured out on my own in years. The power of being filled with that spiritual energy. So, about conversion of the energy. I was once asked by a group of senior women, we got together to talk about Brahmacharya because most of the classical texts just speak about men. And they go into great detail about men's biology and all sorts of things. But they don't speak about women. So we were wondering, well, what about us? Does the energy convert in us as well? So we decided to ask Gurudev, and I drew the short straw, so I was the one that had to approach him with this question. So I said, Gurudev, how does the energy get converted in women? What happens? Does it happen? We've been talking about it. And he said, oh, so you've all been talking about it. He said, this is what? You want to convert the energy? If you see a dirty floor somewhere, clean it. And guess what? The energy will get converted. There's no secret, esoteric process here. It's a natural unfolding. I know many of the senior people here will remember for the first few years of our life here at the ashram, whenever Gurudev came to speak, his basic message was, when you walk down the street, if there's trash on the road, pick it up. And when you go to a public bathroom, if it's dirty, clean it. That was our sadhana. Little did we know we were converting energy into spiritual force. But that's what was happening. I reached a point that whenever I was traveling and had to catch a plane and had to use the bathroom quickly before I boarded, before I would go in, I would pray. I would say, please, I don't have the time. Please, make this bathroom clean. But anyway, that shows you the process of a sincere spiritual seeker. So, I have some points here for you to reflect on, okay, with respect to Brahmacharya. I've been speaking a little esoterically, but now I'm going to bring it home. So, things for you to think about. Are there any areas in your in your life where you don't practice moderation? Who would say that refers to them? Just about everyone in the room. There could be neglect, or there could be overindulgence. And think, does this cause pain to yourself or to others? And are there ways you could do better? If you're in an intimate relationship with someone, do you consider the needs and circumstances of your partner so as to nurture the relationship without draining energy from either of you? 3, do your entertainment choices support purity in thought, word, and deed? If you're trying to convert that energy, and at the same time filling your senses with images that will pull it in other directions, it's like a Chinese handcuff. You know, a Chinese handcuff, you put your fingers in, you pull in opposite directions, and you don't go anywhere. You don't make progress. Another point, diet is very important. The food that we eat builds the body and builds the mind. Can you observe the effects of different foods on your mind, on your energy? For Brahmacharya, sattvic pure vegetarian diet is recommended. Eliminating stimulants or too much of spices. Some spice, good for the system. Too much can get the mind going in different ways. And in general, does your lifestyle support your spiritual aspirations? So things to reflect on. I always feel about the Yama and Niyama in particular, they're not simply intellectual ideas to read in a book, close the book, and go about your life as if nothing's happened. Each one is a powerful, powerful doorway to deeper understanding and spiritual growth. Like I said at the beginning, just pick one. It may not transform the world all at once, but each one of us is part of the world. And if we can transform ourselves, that's a beginning. That's a beginning. One of my favorite quotes is from Margaret Mead, who was an anthropologist. And she said, "Never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. Indeed," she said, "it has never happened in any other way." So, we're a small group of people. Pick one. Nonviolence, truthfulness, non-stealing, moderation or self-restraint, or non-greed. And see, how can I incorporate that more in my life? More than you realize. Not only will you be transforming yourself, but you will be helping to transform the entire world for the benefit of us all. Thank you. Om Shanti.